This is Live for Love TV. Live for Love TV. Yes, I am.
One step more. One step more. One step more. Until you reach your goals. One step more. Save them soul. One step more. One step more. How good it is to reach the
Live for Love TV. This is Live for Love TV. Live for Love TV.
Welcome back here at Live for Love TV, 22nd day of the 4th month of the 21st year of the 21st century. I hope everyone's doing well out there. The other day we talked about Jamaica being a superpower when we were talking about athletics and the Olympics, and we're going to do a little bit more on that. We're going to do something else though. We're not going to just talk about Jamaica this time. We're going to put the spotlight on Mr. Ben Johnson. I believe still the greatest sprinter of all time. I know people are going to see that as controversial because obviously he was banned in 1988 for drug taking, came back a few years later and got banned second time. And so people are going to say, how can he be the best? I mean, he's involved. I don't care what anyone says. You can look back at the record, at the actual time of events, and he was involved in the greatest single 100-meter sprint of all time. Real showdown between some great runners. We had not only Ben Johnson, who had just recently broken the world record, we had the former world record holder. We had the former Olympic champion in that race. We had a massive amount of people. We had, in fact, at the end of that race, 6 people ran under 10 seconds or under, which had never, ever happened before in the Olympics. I'm not sure if it's happened again, but it definitely never happened before that. And it shows you how fast the race was. It was a gunfight at the OK Corral for people who were around at my age and older or younger around that time who remember it. Great, great race. Obviously, the controversy came a day later. Ben Johnson was banned from Olympics. But what's amazing to me is that he was banned because they said he took drugs. But 6 of the 8 people in that race were found out later to have taken drugs, either in that race or before or subsequently, including the winner who was given the Carl Lewis, was caught on 3 performance-enhancing drugs before that race even started. But you know how these things go. This is politics and this is life, and you know who's to be caught should be caught and who shouldn't be caught and not going to be caught. That's why I'd like to redress the balance with Ben Johnson and his abilities. This is a man in 1984 split the Americans in that very Olympics 4 years prior by coming 3rd in that Olympics. He won the bronze medal. It's amazing when you think about it. Split the Americans who were used to the 1, 2, 3s. He was able, with his ability, to split those Americans. Well, people say, well, 1988, he broke the world record, and they talk about his improvements. But just look at everybody else's improvements. Let's look at Linford Christie, for instance. Linford Christie in 1984. Remember, Linford Christie is older than Ben Johnson. But 4 years prior to 1988, he didn't even have the ability to make the British team. Couldn't even get into the Olympics. The British team, can you imagine? There were 3 or 4 runners in England that were better than him in 1984. And in 1988, he comes 3rd, then gets upgraded to 2nd. And yet, no question marks about him. I mean, that improvement far outstrips Ben Johnson's so-called improvement. He came from 3rd place to 1st place. That's not a massive improvement. Yes, the times were amazing. He went from, I think, something like 10.22 to 9.79. That's a massive jump. But there are world record holders right now that have had just about the same amount of jump from their abilities. And, you know, we can always say that, well, there are people out there that haven't actually been caught. And if they haven't been caught, then obviously they're not guilty. But we've got our doubts about who is this and who's that. There's things that have happened that are unexplainable. You know, we got the man who was a former 200-meter world record holder and 400-meter world record holder. A man who couldn't go under 10 seconds for 100 meters was able to run 19.32, I believe, which is something like a split of 9.66 each 100-meter. I mean, that's unexplainable to me. Nobody can, anybody who's ever run or knows anything about running or athletics, my favorite sport, can explain to me how a man who can't do 10 seconds for a single 100 meters can do two splits of 9.66. Though they're not exactly the same, he might not have done them at that exact. That's how it works out. He was getting quicker and quicker in the second 100 meters than he was in the first 100 meters, and so quick that no man who could run a single 100 meters could run that quick. No doubts, no questions mentioned about this man, about how he was able to do this. As we know, Flo Joe broke the world record by such an amazing amount that not even people who have been caught on drugs and gone to prison, like Marion Jones, was able to get close to her record. Yet she was never caught or banned for any performance-enhancing drugs. So the question marks are out there about many, many athletes. And I personally have my own personal views. I don't believe that athletics, it can be clean. I think IWAF are a dirty organization. They deal with money just like any other sport. And they recognize that if people are not breaking world records, then their sport goes down, it dies. So they'll let it go. They'll put it, as long as it does well for their sport, they'll let it go. So that's why I say that people should not put such a bad question mark over Ben Johnson, because Ben Johnson, yes, they put him out there, but there are so many people out there who've been taking drugs throughout the years, and they know, the IAAF know these people are taking drugs, but they're cash cows for the IAAF, so they can't be singled out and called out. So since I think it's something that's just regular, something that's done in the sport, not just in athletics, but in all sports, but especially in athletics. And it's always going to be the case. People who understand how these drugs work will understand why they're taken. Nobody's suggesting that anybody who is the fastest man in the world would not be the fastest man in the world anyway. That person's always going to be the fastest man in the world. The question is, what time will they be able to run without the performance-enhancing drugs? Because performance-enhancing drugs allows you to train longer and harder than the average man could. Where my body will break down after 2 hours of training, their body would go on for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours of that training, and the next day too, and the next day too, and the next day too. And the more you train, obviously, the faster, the stronger your muscles become, the faster you become. So nobody's suggesting that you can just take a drug and run these serious times. And this was what their suggestion was when Ben Johnson ran, 9.79. It was almost like they were saying that this guy was taking drugs and therefore that's why he was the fastest in the world. That's not why he was the fastest in the world. It may be why he had the fastest time, but that he would have been the fastest. If there was no drugs on any athlete, he'd have still been the fastest man in the world. That was his ability. From he was a teenager, he was running serious times. He had the fastest 60 meters of anybody prior to the 1980 Olympics. So he was, he was known to be a powerful sprinter. Maybe he didn't have the finishing power, and maybe that's what the performance-enhancing drugs did for him. But what did it do for everybody else? As I told you, 6 of the 8 runners got under 10 seconds. In fact, the only runner not to complete that, true to pulling up for a hamstring, I'm not going to mention his name, he pulled up in that race in 1988. The only runner, I believe, didn't complete his run, actually got banned as a coach for drugs, which is, that says something about where he was coming from as well. So I think that people should relook at these things and just look at it as it is. So let's not be childish. Let's look at it as it is. That's Live for Love TV.
This is Live for Love TV. Live for Love TV. Yes, I am.
One step more.
This is Live for Love TV.